Hello, this is Judy Bartkowiak here from NLP and EFT Kids. This is my podcast, which I want to share with you as perhaps parents, teachers, maybe even children and teens who may be listening, although I realise that's probably a little unlikely as they're much more interested in following TikTok and things like that. Perhaps I should be on TikTok. So the reason that I have decided to record this podcast today is because I was on my dog walk this morning in the woods, and it reminded me of work I've done with children using metaphor, because children find it quite difficult to explain their feelings. Many of them pick up terms on the internet, such as anxiety issues or anger issues, various things like that. Perhaps not completely understanding what they are. And in NLP terms, these are called nominalizations, in so much as they're very vague, quite broad brush terms, which really mean nothing as such unless you actually understand what the individual belief is behind it. For example, that one person's anxiety isn't going to be the same as another's. One person might get anxious about putting their hand up in class, another child might be anxious about talking to somebody they don't know, or might be anxious about eating in front of people at school. I have a number of children who find that quite difficult. In fact, quite a few who have sort of eating and sleeping problems right now. So anxiety can relate to all sorts of different issues, as can anger. And when children try to express their feelings, they can get a bit tongue-tied and a bit unsure and feel that they may be judged, they may be asked questions, and quite often they're asked why they feel they do as they do. Because I guess, parents want to help, teachers want to help. So a child says, I'm really feeling anxious, and the teacher may say, why is that? And they have to come up with something. So what I find very helpful when working with children is to actually not ask them direct questions. And I learned this very much when I was in my market research career for 20 years, in fact, before I started working with children in a coaching way. I used to work with children doing children's qualitative market research, running focus groups and so on. And I was lucky enough to be trained by Bill Schlackman, a motivational psychologist from America. And he was very instrumental in training all of us research execs on psychodrawing, psychodrama, metaphor, projective techniques, and so on. And so I'm very well used to using these as ways to find out how children feel about sort of products, pack design, new product development, TV shows, and so on. And so it became very much a natural way for me to use that in therapy. And I find it works extremely well. And I want to tell you about it because you may be a parent wondering, how do I get my child to talk about their feelings? How do I get to understand what's going on? They seem to be quite angry, they seem to be quite anxious, they're not sleeping. And naturally, you're worried about them. Of course you are. And it is the most natural thing to sort of say, what's the matter? What can I do? How can I help? Etc. But unfortunately, children often can't find the words to explain. And so what they do is they go into their conscious mind and try to give you a fairly sort of sensible, logical, rational explanation, like, oh, I'm worried about my tests, or I'm worried about this, that, or the other. But actually, there's usually a lot more to it that they can't explain. So what I would like to share with you is how to use metaphor. The most easy way to use it is as it crops up in a natural way, sort of in a casual way, rather than actually going and finding things and saying, how is this a metaphor for how you feel? Much easier instead to maybe find some way as you're just chatting naturally. So, for example, if you go out for a walk with your dog and you're in the woods, there'll be lots of natural phenomena. There'll be like trees and bark and flowers, plants, grasses, stones, cloud formations, birds. Branches, leaves, I could go on. But you really have a whole natural environment there that gives children a whole load of choice about what they pick. So, and you can do this in the garden, of course, as well, if you're lucky enough to have a garden. And you can say, if you just look around you, can you see anything that sort of makes you think about, what you've talked about, your anxiety? What would be a good sort of, is that tree or that bark or that leaf or that branch? Can you see anything that just makes you think, oh, that my anxiety is like that, or my anger can be like this, or how I feel is like that. Um, and they will find something. Trust that they will. You can even look perhaps just outside in the garden, and say, what strikes you. What do you notice in the garden, and how is there a way that you ever feel just like that? So you can use the natural environment. You can also get pictures. Just flick through a magazine maybe and just say, can you find anything here that sort of reminds you of how you feel? Or if you collect shells, or if you have various sort of objects around you, you can just ask about those. I remember actually one of my very first students was a doctor. And what she said was she trained in NLP with me, oh gosh, I think back in sort of 2001. And she wanted to have some techniques to use to understand children and to talk with children in a sort of very relaxed way to build rapport, so she could find out how she could help them. And she said that because she often wasn't in her own surgery, she was perhaps using somebody else's room, she couldn't necessarily have a whole load of stuff. So she would just use what was around her. And what struck me was she said that she could even pick up, say, a stapler, just an ordinary office stapler, and say, how are you like this stapler? And actually, if you think about it, the stapler, clacks together, doesn't it? Well, that could be like a child sort of answering back or being angry. Stapler is quite practical. They can do stuff. Maybe the child feels they can do stuff. You can fiddle on the thing underneath, which can either sort of remove a stapler or take the stapler, put the staple in. So that's quite flexible, has two uses. There's all sorts of ways you can open it up, and you can be quite tall. So take an everyday object and just ask your child, how are you like this? The other thing you can do is, children have lots of toys. You can ask them, how are you like this teddy bear? How are you like this whatever, this bunny rabbit? So just look at their cuddlies sort of lined up on the bed. I know my kids had them sort of lined along the bed. There's hardly room for them. Which of these is most like how you feel today? How does Teddy feel? How does Bunny feel? How does whatever feel? Puppy feel? Which is also, a way of getting them to talk in a projective way, sort of putting their feelings onto their particular cuddlies. You can ask them what colour. If your feeling had a colour, what colour is that today? If your feeling was a bird, what bird would it be? What animal is your feeling? If they say, I'm feeling sick in my tummy and I don't want to go to school, if that sick feeling was an animal, what animal is it? Tell me about the animal. What does the animal want? How is the animal feeling? What does the animal need? I remember a while back I had a lovely 11-year-old client who was studying for her 11 plus. And so she was having to do extra sort of tutoring type of homework. And she said sometimes she gets a headache. And she said that headache was in the center of her head. And I said, if it was an animal, what animal would it be? And she said, it's an ugly brown swamp monster. I mean, amazing. I mean, working with children is just so fantastic. They have the most amazing creative minds. It's such a pleasure to work with them. So I asked her, what does your ugly brown swamp monster want? And she said, it wants to go in the rainforest. So I suggested that she just tap it. And in fact, where the swamp monster was sort of actually on the point between the eyes on the forehead, which is actually our third eye, and it's our intuition energy center, which is interesting. And I suggested that she just tap on it and just tell it can go. So she just tapped and she said, go on, ugly brown swamp monster, off you go to the rainforest. And she used that then to get rid of that feeling of pressure and a headache that she had when she was studying. So what I'm really saying here is, instead of asking the direct question, of why do you feel like this, or when do you feel like this, or whatever, instead go for a metaphor. So when you feel like this, what's it like? What animal are you like when you feel like this? What animal would you like to feel like? Children will come up with, say, a mouse. If they're feeling quite shy and quite nervous, they might say they feel like a mouse. What animal would you like to feel like? Well, I'd like to feel like a roaring lion or a tiger or something like that. So how could you change your mouse into a roaring lion? Could you just do a bit of magic? Could you just maybe just tap on and of course, tapping is something I use a lot with children and teens. Can you just tap on the side of your hand and just magic that mouse into a roaring lion just by tapping on the side there? And of course, they can do that at school. Anything that you can teach them, like a nice little technique that they can use at school, is just fantastic, because they're not around you all the time. They're going to have these feelings at school and the playground and so on. So you can use something like EFT tapping to help them. You can set up an anchor, which is an NLP technique, where you get them to make a sort of either to imagine something, maybe imagine that roaring tiger. Maybe they can make as if they're doing a sort of roaring tigery sort of noise. Or you can perhaps do like a thumbs up or some other sort of action for them to remember that. And so there's lots of techniques. I mean, one of the things that I love to do is to help parents and teachers, of course, in sharing some of these techniques with the children that they love, that they care for, that they work with. I train, as you know, I train people in working with children, but I can also help you as a parent. You just book an appointment with me, talk about, how you'd like to help your child, and I can give you some tips and techniques to pass on to them. And I actually offer 30 minutes free, and you can pick up a few tips in that time. So please do get in touch if you'd like me to do that with you. So use metaphor, use an indirect approach, really channel your child's imagination and creativity to understand how they're feeling. And just my last point, in fact, if you go to my book, Understanding Children and Teens, A Practical Guide for Parents, Teachers and Coaches, this is explained in a lot more detail with lots of exercises and activities that you can do with them. Okay, so I hope you found that helpful. And my website is judybartkowiak.com. Okay, bye.